Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I'll be reviewing the final Sony-published PS4 exclusive for the generation, and that is Ghost of Tsushima. Now, I do apologize for getting this review out so late, and a lot of that's because I really took my time playing Ghost of Tsushima. I mean, this is a game that, for me personally, I had so much more fun just exploring the open world than I did actually playing the main campaign of the game. Like, unlike The Last of Us Part 2, which obviously just came out a month before that, and when I played The Last of Us Part 2, like, I needed to finish it right away. I needed to know exactly what happened. I needed to know every little thing. So I finished that within like 3 days. Like, here with Ghost of Tsushima, that obviously did not happen. Which you can look at as a pro to its open world design, but I also look at it more so as a negative towards its narrative, but we'll talk about that later. So I do have a lot to talk about, so let's start talking about the open world, which, as I said, I think is the most fun part of this game, is exploring its open world. Visually, it's really, really incredible. We have very vibrant colors, really great lighting. I do think graphically overall, though, the character models are kind of a bit and there's some very wonky animations, but for the most part, this game looks really great. This game does something that a lot of fans of like Witcher-style RPGs have been wanting for a while, and that is getting rid of the HUD. I've never personally been a big proponent of this. Not that I'm anti it either. Again, like, I do think games like Horizon, the Assassin's Creed games, like, have too much of a HUD. And I was fine with how the HUD functioned in this game, where it completely disappears through most of the game and only appears once you need to use it, like when you push R2 and need to change weapons, or when you push on the guiding wind to show you where to go, like that sort of stuff. Like, it only comes up when necessary, and that element of it I did really enjoy. And speaking of guiding wind, I think that's another really innovative thing that they added in here, this more in-game way of showing you where you need to go, because obviously with most games there's like a compass or a mini map, but something I loved here is the guiding wind is something that just feels like part of the world. Like, you swipe up on the touchpad and that makes the wind blow in the direction that you need to go to your objective. I really like that element of it. Again, it reduces the amount of HUD that's necessary. But a minor complaint of mine as well with this is, because this is controlled using the touchpad, and because this game uses the touchpad a lot, I mean, the touchpad has 4 different commands, 4 different directions that you could swipe on it, and through that, there are times where the game kind of got confused. Like, when I was trying to actually use the guiding wind, there were sometimes it would think I was pushing down, and it would do a bow instead, and that was kind of annoying. And despite the open world being really beautiful, and again, like, being one of the best parts of the game, I do think there are a lot of like open world game tropes that are here. It's kind of weird because, again, like, we came from The Last of Us Part 2, which was a game that tried to defy expectations on what a game is. I feel like Ghost of Tsushima does the opposite, where it just plays into exactly what a game is supposed to be. Again, open world here, a lot of question marks on the map, a lot of forts that you need to take down all the enemies within, and once you do that, it opens up the map, and like this sort of stuff that we see in like almost every other open world game. There's like a bevy of like fox dens, which I think, like, the first time you see a fox den, it's cool. It's like, oh, you're following this fox to see where its shrine is and all that sort of stuff, and that's cool, but then you do it like a billion times and it gets really repetitive. Same thing with the haikus, same thing with pretty much every open world element of this game. Like, it's cool the first time you see it, and it really fits into the world, this like Japanese open world, but it's like, it gets really boring when you're doing this over and over and over again. Most of the side quests do revolve around characters that you meet in the main story, and I feel like those are probably some of the better ones in the game. And to be honest, some of these side quests, in my opinion, are better than the main quests, but again, we'll talk about that later. But I personally really enjoyed the Misako storyline. I really enjoyed the Ishikawa storyline. I feel like those two were the best side quests in the game. And there's other characters like Kenji, Yuna, and Norio that get side quest lines as well, but I didn't find those as interesting. The other random side quests that you find throughout the world are more episodic. They're very much like, hey, this person needs help. You take out some enemies for them, and then you return them, and that's it. It was like kind of basic stuff. There are also mythic tales in Ghost of Tsushima, and these were a bit more interesting. These felt a lot more like these, again, typical sort of quests in these massive open world games of trying to get like the best armor in the game. So like in Horizon, when you do the cauldrons, that sort of stuff that were pretty hit or miss for me. I mean, there's some of them that like actually had a lot of interesting narratives behind them. But there were also some quests that were like, go to like some of these forts around the world and clear them, and those were just kind of meh. I didn't even talk about the shrines, which I think the shrines in this game were a lot of fun. Again, they are one of these like more generic just side activities around the world, but they very much felt like tombs from Assassin's Creed, which is something that I really miss from those, where it was a lot of like puzzle platforming, and I found those sections really fun. The platforming in general in the game, though, is very wonky. I mean, there's sometimes where you jump towards a ledge and it just doesn't grab on for some reason. To climb in the game, you don't use a jump button. It's mostly you just pointing in the direction of where you want to go, and I felt like that felt very hollow. Now we talk about the combat, which I really liked. I mean, in many ways, I felt like the combat was very similar to what I would expect from a Assassin's Creed game. It kind of felt like a mix of what we would get in the modern Assassin's Creed games from the more like Witcher style Assassin's Creed games, so mixing that with like something from like an AC1 or Assassin's Creed Unity, where there's light and heavy attacks. You have to find the right times to parry. You can use a heavy attack to break their guard and then barrage them with attacks immediately afterwards. You can use an assortment of weapons, which I did really like how many different style of weapons there were in this game, though a minor complaint as well is I don't love how you switch between these weapons. I felt like trying to switch between weapons in the middle of combat was kind of annoying. There are different stances that you can use in the game, which I really like this as well. Again, really fits within the setting. And I did like how some of these stances give you an advantage against certain types of enemies, though, to be honest, I didn't really switch stances that much. But that brings me to another like kind of minor complaint with the game is how so much of this game revolves around the R2 button. It's really weird how it's the case. Like, I don't know who decided that, oh, you know what, R2 is going to be the button that does everything in this game. Like, R2 is the interact button, R2 is the button that you use like to crawl under things, R2 is the button that you use to squeeze through cracks, R2 is the button that you use to switch your stance, to switch your weapons, R2 is the button that you use to pick up supplies. R2 just does way too much in this game. Like, I don't know why they decided R2 was the button to do this, but whatever. And I think really that's another, like, not complaint, but another thing I noticed is that there's just so many controls in this game. Like, pretty much every single button on the controller is utilized. Every single possible way you can use something is utilized. As I said, even the touchpad has 4 different controls for different directions that you swipe, plus also an Eagle Vision style mode for pushing on it. Again, just like every button in this game does something, and ideally I feel like that should have been toned down. You can assassinate people in this game, and again, it just makes it feel like such an Assassin's Creed game. Like, this really does feel like the Assassin's Creed game that Ubisoft was never willing to make. It's a mostly grounded game. I mean, there are some points where, like, I mean, again, it's like, it's definitely gamey. Like, there's definitely a lot of game elements into this, but for the most part, it tries to stay grounded within reality. It utilizes stealth a lot. To be honest, a lot more than I was expecting, or at least it forces you to use stealth a lot more than I was expecting, which again, we might talk about a bit later. But it really just felt like an Assassin's Creed game, which I have no complaints about. I know a lot of people were upset saying that, oh, this is just another generic game, another generic open world game, and it's like, it is, but it's one that I wanted, and it's one that I did enjoy playing for the most part. I guess now we can talk about the main story, and for me, this was the weakest aspect of the game. I personally found the main story kind of boring. Again, that is part of the reason why I was kind of okay with not rushing through the game. For me, the enjoyable parts of the game were the times that you weren't doing main story missions. The main story missions, to me, were the weakest elements of the game. I mean, we start off the game with this prologue that shows the samurais being defeated by the Mongols and Jin trying to rescue his uncle and failing, and I found this really slow. I mean, I did not particularly care for that first hour of the game, to the point where I was like, do I really even like this game? It was until we got into the open world and I just ignored the rest of the main quest for a good like 5-hour period. That just felt so much more fun to me than what was going on in the main story. But after this, we do have to recruit a group of people that will help us rescue our uncle. And I like this from a conceptual standpoint. I think conceptually this is really good. And especially because, as I mentioned earlier, it leads to side quests that are probably some of the better side quests in the game. But at the end of Act 1, we do rescue Lord Shimura. And this leads to Act 2, where we have to take back Shimura's castle. And I don't know, something about this act structure I didn't particularly like. Because if you really think about what happens within all of these acts, not much actually happens. It doesn't really feel like a very complex narrative. It's a very baseline narrative, and that's a lot of the reason why, for me personally, I just felt kind of with it. Again, this game isn't a game that you play for its story. It's a game that you play for the open world, for the combat, for the samurai role play within the game. You don't really play it for the story here. And then we get to Act 2, which is just more of the same. We recruit more people. We recruit Norio. We recruit the people of Yarikawa. And it leads to us attacking the castle of Shimura. But I will say that at the end of Act 2, I feel like that's when the narrative kind of picks up for me. Again, everything before that was just kind of It's like I really didn't care about anything. But I think at the point where the conflict between Jin and Lord Shimura rises up, where obviously Jin is now turning into the ghost, someone that is using more stealthy tactics that are very anti what a samurai would use, while Lord Shimura obviously still tries to follow the code of the samurai. And I think this conflict really makes the story. It's really the best part of the story, because I don't feel like anything else in the story works. Act 2 ends with Jin going against his uncle's wishes and poisons the Mongols instead of attacking them head on. And because of this, Jin ends up arrested and we have to escape. And this section was kind of annoying. I will say, like, Act 3, I think, is probably the best act narrative-wise, but I also feel like it's the weakest act gameplay-wise. The thing about Act 3 that really annoyed me was the abundance of stealth missions. There are so many missions that forced you to use stealth that you couldn't be detected while doing it. It's like, that's something that I was kind of annoyed by this game. Obviously, the game is called Ghost of Tsushima, so you would expect that the game would be revolving more so around the ghost element of it than the samurai element of it. But I think coming into it, I was really expecting the game to give us the choice of the two. I was expecting us to be able to choose whether we wanted to play the game like a samurai or play the game like the ghost. But instead, the game kind of forces you to play like the ghost by the end of it. Then we get a good amount of time where we're just like exiled and we're just trying to like figure out what to do, and that kind of drags on a bit. But eventually we have to sneak back in the castle Shimura for some reason to leave a letter to try to get Shimura's help. And it's like, I felt like that mission was kind of dumb too, right? It's like, why take the time to sneak into his castle, all the way sneak up to his room, leave a letter, and then just sneak out? It just kind of felt dumb. I felt like there were probably better ways to approach Shimura than that, but whatever. We then get to the penultimate mission in the game, which involves taking down the Khan once and for all. You attack the stronghold at Port Izumi, and you take him down, and this felt like the big climatic fight of the game. Obviously it's not. There's one more mission after this, but you do have to kill him multiple times, and he's finally dead. And to be honest, again, for me, this storyline, it really meant nothing to me. I really didn't care about any of this. For me, the Mongol invasion storyline was definitely the weakest element of the game. It's whatever. But then we move on to the final mission, which I liked. I really liked how they handled this. We had this final meetup with Lord Shimura, and they kind of reminisce on the old days, but then eventually it comes out that Lord Shimura was actually told to kill Jin. And we have them reluctantly fighting each other, and that's the final bit of gameplay in the game, is us fighting Lord Shimura and having to defeat him. And then we're given this final choice in the game, which I found really weird, because like the game does have choices throughout of like minor dialogue choices, but it never really had a major choice until the very, very end of the game, where we're given the choice to either kill Shimura or to spare him. And I personally chose the spare option. I did go back and watch the kill option as well, and I didn't particularly care for the killing ending, if I'm being honest. Like, I felt like it just felt kind of abrupt, just kind of killing him and then like sobbing while holding on to him, and then it just like cuts away. I felt like the spare ending for me was personally a lot better, where I know some people claim that, oh, you should have killed him because it's like the ghost. He's now the ghost. He's embracing the ghost. It's like, but like, the ghost was never meant to be a thing where like he's just killing random people. He's not like just killing people for the sake of it. He's killing people for the betterment of his people. It's like, for me, like him killing his uncle isn't really something the ghost would do. It's like there's no reason to kill his uncle, especially if his uncle's not going to continue to hunt him down anyway, which becomes evident by the spare ending anyway. So it's like, for me, I mean, I just felt like sparing him was the better option. I feel like it makes the most narrative sense. Seeing him like say farewell to his uncle and then walk away into the sunset, I felt like that was kind of the better way to end the story for me personally. And I guess the final thing we could talk about here is the character of Jin, the main character in the game. And I don't really have that much to say about him, to be honest. And I think that's one of the biggest knocks against him, is that I don't really feel like he had much to really do until the end of the game. I mean, obviously, like earlier on, there is this conflict of like, is he going to stay a samurai or is he going to become the ghost? And I feel like that's obviously the most interesting storyline throughout the game. But it never really comes to a head until that back portion of the game. And then, again, that back portion of the game is the most interesting portion for me narratively. Like the stuff between him and Shimura, I think is the most interesting part of the game. But like everything before that just kind of felt to me. And I feel like as a character, he doesn't really pop out to me. Like, I think in comparison to other protagonists from similar sort of games, like Aloy, like Geralt, like, Bayek from AC Origins, it's like, I feel like these other characters do a much better job at being this sort of, like, serious person on a mission character that Jin he just felt kind of flat to me. Like, he didn't really have any humor to him. He just felt there. Like, if he wasn't like the main character of the game, to us, he would be very forgettable in my opinion. Because like even other characters that are relatively flat, like characters like Connor from Assassin's Creed 3 or Altair from Assassin's Creed 1, I feel like at least they have very defining moments in my eyes, like within their narratives that make them pop out. For me, Jin doesn't really have that. I guess you could say the ending where he kills Shimura or like fights Shimura, like, but it's like outside of that, I don't really feel like he has a big character moment within the narrative. So for me, just Jin doesn't stand out to me. But I'm not saying I dislike him. I feel like there's a lot of potential for his character if he was just written better. And I just feel like he was just kind of written in a monotone way, in a way that doesn't really make him pop out. So those are most of my thoughts on Ghost of Tsushima. I think Ghost of Tsushima is a well-made game for the most part. I think it's a game that does lack a bit of polish. I think there are points where you can clearly tell that things could have been fleshed out a bit more. Like animations could have used a lot of work. There are times where like you can clearly see things loading in the background. Like there are little kinks that could be worked out. But outside of that, it's a pretty standard but well-made open world game. Like it does what you would expect from an open world game, but mixing that in with all the elements of Japanese culture, I think it really makes it something that's really fun to play and really fun to experience. Narratively, again, I don't care about it for the most part. Yes, there's some cool moments at the end of the game, but it's like for the most part though, it is a pretty forgettable story. But it's really the open world and the experience of exploring it that really makes this game stand out to me. Now, I will be making a Sony-published PS4 exclusive ranking down the road that this will obviously be part of. This is the final game that needed to come out before I'm able to make that video. So stay tuned for that. It's probably still months down the road, but stay tuned for that either way. I would like to replay Ghost of Tsushima before I make that video anyway, so I'll probably do that. But yeah, I think that's pretty much most of what I have to say about the game. Again, mostly enjoyed it, but had some minor nitpicks here and there. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.